Hi everybody, my name is Declan, and today I'm going to be showing you how to do some basic sewing on this Singer heavy-duty sewing machine. This is the model of sewing machine that we have at both IRL locations, but you'll find that a lot of the stuff I'm showing you today is going to be really easily transferable to any other sewing machine that looks like this. Okay, so the first thing you need to know how to do is how to thread your machine. And to thread your machine, you'll need your top thread and your bottom thread, or your bobbin. Thread the top thread, you put your the spool on the spindle on the top, and then run it through the first hook here. All of the steps for threading your top thread are shown in the top right corner, and on your machine, it's likely that they'll be numbered. So you can just follow the arrows over the top, onto the front, up through this hook here, you can see that on the top, and then down through what is the sixth step on this machine, but it should be numbered on any machine you're using. So down here at the needle, I suggest cutting your thread or just making sure that the end isn't frayed so that it can go through your needle. After you push it through the needle, you go through the bottom of the foot and out the back of the machine. And then to put your bobbin in, it's pretty simple. You just insert the bobbin into the case down here. On the case, there's a little diagram of where to put the thread, and you'll see that on the case. And then make sure you do that and send it out the back of the machine. So give yourself about, I would say, about a foot of thread coming out the back, like you can see here, of each, and you're ready to start sewing. So before you start sewing, you may want to mess around with some of the settings on your sewing machine. And you can do that with these dials on top or these on the side. The first that you might want to change is the tension, and that is if you notice your stitching is too tight or too loose, you can mess around with the tension a little bit. That will vary depending on maybe what kind of fabric you're using or how strong your needle is or something like that. The width will only apply if you're not doing a straight stitch. So if you increase your width, then your needle is going to move. It's going to have a wider width of movement. So that would apply to like a zigzag stitch or something like that. Your length it's important because you don't want your stitch length to be too long or too short. I keep it at 2. That's like a pretty decent standard length. But of course, if you want something to be sewn together really tightly, you can shorten it down to 1 or even shorter than that. And then this dial will help you adjust what kind of stitch you're doing. So I'm going to keep it at a straight stitch for now, but you can see there are a lot of different options. There's zigzag stitch. You can even do a stitch that specially does buttonholes and things like that. So make sure all these settings are to your liking before you start sewing. So now I'm going to show you how to do a basic stitch. Got some cotton fabric here, and I'm just going to do a straight stitch down the middle to show you what that looks like. So the first thing you need to do is position your fabric under your needle. Make sure to raise your needle with this hand wheel if it's in the way, and then lower the presser foot using this lever here on the back. It's important that you lower your presser foot before you start sewing because that will help hold the fabric in place, and it will help stabilize it as it moves through. So if you don't have your presser foot down, you're really just not going to get a quality stitch. So use the presser foot on the ground to run your needle, and of course as you apply more pressure to the presser foot, the needle's going to go faster. As you apply less pressure, it's going to go slower. So I would suggest keeping a nice moderate pace, especially if this is like your first time sewing. And in general, it's better to keep more of a moderate pace. So as you can see, I'm kind of using my hands to push the fabric. There are feed dogs under the presser foot that will help the fabric move through, but it is good to just use a little bit of force just to make sure everything's moving smoothly. You don't want your fabric to get stuck or bunch up, so You know, just push gently as you stitch. Once you're done, lift your presser foot, pull it away, and take the excess thread, and you can actually cut the excess thread on this knife here. I'm pointing to it here. So bring it on either side, pull it through, and that will actually cut the excess off. So here's what my stitch looks like. I don't know if you can see it. It's not very dark, but you can see that kind of blue line on this side, and that's the top thread. So I actually changed the color of the bottom thread so that you can see that it's a different color on the bottom. Is that showing up there? Okay, so it's kind of hard to see the color difference, but the point is the bottom thread is red, the top thread's blue. So on one side you're going to have blue thread, and on the other side you're going to have red thread. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is a back stitch. So basically a back stitch is just an overlap of the stitches at the beginning and the end of a stitch, and that just helps the stitch be more secure. It prevents fraying, and it just helps it stay in place better. So I've added a picture here in the bottom left, and this is the reverse button that is on the front of the machine, so you can't see it with these camera angles, but it's right on the front of the machine, and you just want to use it. You press down on it when you want to go in reverse. So you'll stitch normally for 3 or 4 stitches. That's like your first couple stitches. You hold it down as you go back for 3 or 4 stitches, and then you release it to continue going forward. So after you've gone forward, you finish your stitch, you're at the end, and then you apply it again to kind of go backwards and then forwards to, you know, to complete it. So I'm going to do that, and you'll be able to see me using my hand here on the front, and every time I do that, it's going to change the direction of the needle. So I've done 3 or 4 stitches. I hold it down, I go back, and then I continue forward. So I'm at the end of my stitch, I hold it down, I go back for 3 or 4 stitches, and then I continue forward and I'm done. The next thing I want to show you is how to turn a corner. So in order to turn a corner, you need to keep your needle in the fabric, so you can use your hand wheel here to make sure the needle is lowered into the fabric. Raise the presser foot, and then you just rotate your fabric, then you lower the presser foot again. Now the fabric's in place, and you can now stitch in that direction. This is a good tool to have on hand when you're sewing, in the event that you make a mistake. Maybe you make a stitch where you don't want it to be, or you stitch too long, something like that. So this is called a seam ripper, and it will help you take those bad stitches out. So as you can see up in the top left, I've got my stitch here, and what I'm going to do is just take this kind of pointy end of my seam ripper and get it under the loop right here. So I'm under that loop, and I'm just going to push through to tear the thread. Be careful not to tear your fabric. So I get under that loop again here. Depending on how much you want to take out, you can seam rip all up and down here. I'm going to do another one, and I'm just breaking that stitch up. So I'm going to switch to the other side, my bottom thread. Now I'm going to take out a couple of that, and as you can see now, it's coming out really easy. And I can just take that thread out. This can be tedious, especially if you have a really short stitch length. Of course, if you have a long stitch length, it's going to be easier, but that's because your stitch is kind of weaker. So if you're sewing 2 pieces of fabric together, or if you have 1 piece of fabric folded in half, and you want 2 edges to line up, then using pins is a really good way to make sure that they stay aligned while you're sewing. So I'll show you how to insert the pins, and then also how to sew while you have the pins in your fabric. So to insert the pins, so assuming this is the line, these are the 2 edges that I want to line up, then I'm going to put the pin in kind of near the edge here, put it through, and then bring it back up, maybe about ½ an inch away from that. I'm going to do 2 here, and what's important is that I'm using the pins perpendicular to the stitch that I'm going to be sewing. So as you can see here, I'm going to sew down this side, and what I'm going to do is, as I'm sewing, I can use my finger to just pull this pin out really easily, because you don't want your needle running over a pin. That can either break the pin or the needle or both, and you don't want that to happen. So now I'm at my sewing machine. I have my fabric ready to go, and I have my presser foot down, and I'm going to start stitching. And then when I get close to that pin, you can't see it super well, but I'm basically just going to pull it right out and put it back in my pin cushion. I'm going to continue sewing, and then I'm going to pull the second pin out. Finish sewing, got the excess, and as you can see, I got my stitch, and my two edges are lining up. Now I'm going to show you how to thread an empty bobbin. Bobbin is something you need to rethread yourself, unlike the top thread. It will run out of thread after a number of uses, but it's a fairly simple process to rethread it. You're just going to use your top thread, or whatever kind of thread you want to be in your bobbin. You're going to load the top thread onto the spindle, just like you did when you were first threading your machine. You're going to bring it through this hook here, but now you're going to do a loop around this tension disc here. And there's actually a diagram on the sewing machine that will show you what direction to go in. Bring it to the outside, and then make that loop. So now you're going to want to take the end of your thread, put it through the top hole of the bobbin. I'll just do that. So now you got something that looks kind of like this. And then you want to load your bobbin onto this spindle here. Once it's loaded on, move it to the right, and now your sewing machine will recognize that when you use the foot pedal, it's not sewing, it's going to be threading the bobbin. So you use your foot pedal gently and with a consistent pace to get a kind of a first layer of thread down. You'll see as I push down. So now we have a little bit of thread. You can see it's kind of darker here, and that's on the bobbin now. So cut this excess thread off, and you can finish just by continuing to press down. Make sure that you don't speed up or slow down too much like you might do when you're sewing, and it's fine when you're sewing, but when you're threading, you want to use a consistent speed so that the thread is tied around the bobbin very consistently. It's even, and it won't give you any problems when you're using it to sew. So I'm pressing down. You can see the bobbin is spinning, top thread is spinning. I'll speed up a little bit. and we'll just say that's good enough. So now I have my bobbin. Of course, it's still attached to the top thread. Cut that off, and there you go.